My marriage was like a museum exhibit, beautiful, expensive, and full of things nobody actually touched anymore. The irony wasn't lost on me that my wife Linda actually worked at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, curating late people's treasures while our own relationship gathered dust. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I'm Robert Fox, 36 years old, and I should have seen it coming. When your wife starts working late every night and comes home smelling like expensive cologne that isn't yours, you don't need a PhD in biochemistry to figure out the formula, but I had one anyway, which made my willful blindness even more pathetic. The first real warning sign came on a Tuesday in March. I was in my lab at Biogenesis Research, analyzing protein sequences, when my phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Working late again with the Peterson account. Don't wait up. The Peterson account? Everything in my life seemed to revolve around the Peterson family these days. My father-in-law, Harold Peterson, ran Peterson Industries like his personal kingdom. His wife Margaret held the real power as majority shareholder, but Harold loved playing the ruthless CEO. Their daughter Linda had inherited Harold's ambition and Margaret's calculating intelligence, which initially attracted me. Now it felt like being married to a beautiful shark. The Peterson connection had gotten me my current job, actually. Harold needed someone to oversee the biotech acquisitions his company was making, and Linda suggested her husband, the biochemist. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt like a kept man, which Linda never let me forget during our increasingly frequent arguments. At least Ethan appreciates what the family has done for him, she'd said last week, referring to Ethan Lowe, the 32-year-old project manager who'd become Harold's golden boy. Ethan was everything I wasn't. Smooth, ambitious, and willing to kiss Harold's ring. He also had the kind of lean, athletic build that came from expensive personal trainers, not late nights hunched over laboratory equipment. I'd met Ethan at several company events, where he'd perfected the art of making every conversation about himself while pretending to be interested in others. "Robert, buddy," he'd say, flashing those perfect white teeth. "Still playing with test tubes? That's so important. Really foundational work." The condescension was thick enough to culture bacteria in, but it was the little things that really got to me. Linda had started buying expensive gifts for clients. A silk tie here, a leather briefcase there. When I asked about it, she'd give me that patient look she reserved for particularly slow museum visitors. "It's called relationship building, Robert. Maybe if you understood business better, you'd see why these gestures matter." The gifts always seemed to be exactly Ethan's style. Coincidence, I'm sure. Then there was the Mandarin situation. I'd spent 3 years in Shanghai early in my career, working for a pharmaceutical company and becoming fluent in Mandarin Chinese. It was one of my few genuinely impressive skills, and Linda used to love showing it off at parties. Lately, though, she seemed to have forgotten I spoke it at all, which made her recent text messages particularly interesting. I'd noticed her phone lighting up with messages in Chinese characters. When I casually asked about it, she'd laughed it off. "Oh, that's just the translation app acting up. You know how technology is." Except I could read enough to know they weren't random translations. Someone was writing to my wife in Mandarin, and the messages I glimpsed were distinctly personal. "You were amazing last night. Doesn't typically require Google Translate." My friend Sam Morrison, an ex-cop turned private investigator, had been dropping hints for weeks. We'd grab beers at Murphy's Pub, and he'd give me those knowing looks that cops perfect after years of dealing with domestic situations. "You know, Rob," he'd said last Friday, nursing his third Guinness, "sometimes the things right in front of us are the hardest to see. Occupational hazard of being a decent guy." Sam had the weathered face and cynical humor of someone who'd seen too much human nature. He'd left the Boston PD after a corruption scandal he'd tried to expose went sideways, leaving him with a pension and a deep distrust of powerful people. People like the Petersons. "Your father-in-law's got quite a reputation," Sam had mentioned once. "Old-school businessman, the kind who thinks handshake deals and backroom conversations still run the world." "What kind of reputation?" "The kind where ambitious young men get promoted fast if they play the game right, and wives of inconvenient employees sometimes find themselves very well taken care of during divorce proceedings." I'd laughed it off then. Now, staring at my phone displaying Linda's latest excuse, Sam's words felt prophetic. The breaking point came that Thursday evening. I'd gotten home early, hoping to surprise Linda with dinner from her favorite Thai place. Instead, I found her in our bedroom, on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. "No, he doesn't suspect anything," she was saying. "Robert's completely oblivious. He's too busy with his little experiments to notice what's happening in the real world. I stood in the doorway, Thai food growing cold in my hands, listening to my wife discuss my obliviousness with someone who clearly knew me well enough to be concerned about my suspicions. Ethan, you're worrying too much, she continued, and my stomach dropped. Daddy's already planning the transition. By summer, you'll be VP, and we can stop sneaking around. The transition. VP. We can stop sneaking around. I backed away quietly, set the food on the kitchen counter, and walked out of my own house. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, engine off, trying to process what I'd heard. My wife was having an affair with Ethan Lowe. My father-in-law was planning to promote her lover. And apparently, I was so pathetically unaware that they felt comfortable discussing it in my own bedroom. When I finally went back inside, Linda was in the kitchen, looking perfectly normal. "Oh, you brought Thai food. How sweet. I was just talking to Chloe about the museum fundraiser." Chloe was Linda's best friend, a gossip who knew everyone's business in Boston's cultural scene. She was also about as likely to discuss museum fundraisers as I was to win a Nobel Prize in literature. "How is Chloe?" I asked, testing. "Oh, you know her. Always full of drama about men. She's dating this new guy who works in finance, very ambitious." The lie came so easily. I almost admired the craftsmanship. Over the next week, I paid attention. Really paid attention. Linda's late nights coincided perfectly with Ethan's social media posts from expensive restaurants. Her new perfume matched the scent I'd noticed on Ethan's jacket at the last company mixer. Most damning of all, she'd started wearing lingerie to bed again, but only on nights when she claimed to be too tired for intimacy. "I'm just trying to feel good about myself," she'd explained when I commented on the sudden wardrobe upgrade. "Is that a crime?" No, but adultery was still grounds for divorce in Massachusetts. The final piece of evidence came courtesy of modern technology's complete inability to understand human discretion. Linda had left her laptop open on the kitchen table, logged into her email. I wasn't snooping, exactly. The screen was right there, displaying a message thread that made my pressure spike. The emails were from Ethan, and they painted a picture of a relationship that had been going on for months. Dinner reservations at hotels I'd never been to. References to our future together. Most infuriatingly, detailed discussions of how Robert will be fine because he was too passive to cause problems. Too passive to cause problems. That phrase stuck with me as I closed the laptop and went back to my coffee. Too passive, like I was some kind of domesticated pet who'd roll over and accept whatever scraps they threw me. They were about to learn that 3 years in Shanghai had taught me more than just Mandarin. Sometimes the most devastating attacks come from directions your enemy never considered. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "Robert, important client dinner tomorrow night. Jade Garden, 7 p.m., wear a good suit. This could be big for the company." I smiled for the first time in weeks. Harold Peterson was about to get exactly what he'd asked for. The Jade Garden was the kind of restaurant where Boston's business elite went to impress clients and make deals over Peking duck. Private rooms, discreet waitstaff, and prices that required expense account justification. Harold had reserved the VIP room, naturally, because subtlety had never been his strong suit. I arrived exactly on time, wearing my best suit and what Linda would have called my game face, if she'd bothered to notice. She was already there, looking stunning in a black dress I'd never seen before, sitting next to Ethan, who'd apparently coordinated his tie to complement her outfit. Subtle. "Robert," Harold boomed, standing to shake my hand with his trademark bone-crushing grip. "Glad you could make it. This is Mr. Zhang from Pacific Rim Biotech, potentially our biggest acquisition yet." Mr. Zhang was a distinguished man in his 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from serious money. He stood and offered a polite handshake. "Mr. Fox, pleasure to meet you. Harold speaks very highly of your expertise." His English was perfect, barely accented, but I caught the slight pause that suggested he was more comfortable in his native language. Interesting. "The pleasure's mine, Mr. Zhang. I'm looking forward to learning about your company." I took my seat across from Linda and Ethan, which gave me a perfect view of their body language. They were sitting just close enough to seem friendly, but I noticed how Ethan's arm rested on the back of Linda's chair, how she leaned slightly toward him when he spoke, how they shared those little smiles that couples think are invisible to others. Harold was in full performance mode, discussing market opportunities and synergies with the enthusiasm of a man who genuinely loved making deals. Mr. Zhang listened politely, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed a sharp understanding of the biotech industry. "Your acquisition strategy is impressive," Mr. Zhang said as our appetizers arrived, "though I'm curious about your internal research capabilities. Having strong scientific leadership is crucial for evaluating potential targets. That's where Robert comes in, Harold said, gesturing toward me. Best biochemist we've got. PhD from MIT, 3 years in Shanghai with Chen Pharmaceuticals. He knows the Asian market better than anyone. Shanghai, Mr. Zhang said, looking at me with new interest. Fascinating city. Did you enjoy your time there? Very much. The research environment was incredibly dynamic. I learned a great deal. What I didn't mention was that most of what I'd learned had nothing to do with biochemistry. Shanghai had taught me about patience, about observing before acting, about the power of understanding more than people realized you understood. As dinner progressed, I played the role Harold expected, the quiet technical expert, there to nod intelligently and provide credibility but not to lead conversations. It was a role I'd perfected over 2 years of company dinners, and it came with an unexpected advantage. People forgot I was listening. Linda and Ethan were getting bolder as the wine flowed. Nothing obvious, but I caught the subtle touches, the shared glances, the way Ethan's foot had migrated under the table to rest against Linda's leg. She was wearing her "I have a secret" smile, the one that used to make me feel special and now made me want to throw things. Robert's always been the quiet type, Linda said during a lull in conversation. He prefers his laboratory to social situations, don't you, honey? The endearment dripped with condescension. I find observation more interesting than participation sometimes, I replied. You learn surprising things when people think you're not paying attention. Ethan laughed. That's our Robert. Always analyzing. Must be the scientist in him. Our Robert. Like I was a shared pet. Harold was deep into his pitch now, discussing revenue projections and market penetration strategies. Mr. Zhang listened carefully, occasionally taking notes, but I noticed his attention wandering slightly. He seemed more interested in the interpersonal dynamics at the table than the business discussion. That's when Harold made his first mistake. The beauty of this deal, Harold continued, is that we're not just acquiring technology. We're building relationships that will last for decades. Long-term partnerships require trust, and trust requires understanding. He paused to refill his wine glass, then continued in what he probably thought was a lower voice. Of course, some relationships are more important than others. Family business, you understand? Mr. Zhang nodded politely, but I saw something shift in his expression. Harold had just signaled that this wasn't purely a business dinner, and experienced dealmakers always paid attention when family dynamics entered the equation. That's when Harold made his second mistake. He switched to Mandarin. Mr. Zhang, Harold said, his pronunciation clumsy but understandable, I want to be direct with you. This acquisition is important to me personally. My family's future depends on making the right strategic moves. Mr. Zhang responded in fluid Mandarin, clearly relieved to speak his native language. I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Peterson. Family considerations are always important in business decisions. Harold's Mandarin was functional but limited, probably learned from a business language course. He was managing basic concepts but missing subtleties. Mr. Zhang, being polite, was speaking slowly and simply. There are changes coming in my organization, Harold continued in Mandarin. New leadership. My son-in-law here, he gestured toward me, is very talented, but perhaps not suited for the business side. We're developing other options. I kept my expression neutral, playing the role of the monolingual American who couldn't follow the conversation. Inside, my heart was starting to race. Mr. Zhang glanced at me, then back at Harold. Other options? My daughter is married to Robert, but she's developed a relationship with someone more suitable for our business needs. Harold's Mandarin was getting more confident as he warmed to his subject. Ethan here has the right instincts for leadership. We're planning to promote him significantly, and Linda will be free to make better choices about her personal life. The room felt like it was tilting. Harold wasn't just tolerating Linda's affair, he was orchestrating it. This wasn't just about my wife cheating. It was about my father-in-law systematically replacing me with a man he considered more useful. Mr. Zhang's expression had become carefully neutral. And Mr. Fox? He seems like a capable man. Harold waved dismissively. Robert is brilliant in his field, but he lacks ambition. He's too passive for the business world. He'll be fine. Men like him always land on their feet, and Linda will be much happier with someone who understands her needs. Ethan, who'd been following the Mandarin conversation about as well as a golden retriever follows quantum physics, chose that moment to demonstrate his own ambitions. His hand dropped below the table, and I saw Linda's sharp intake of breath as he apparently found what he was looking for. She didn't pull away. The transition will be smooth, Harold continued in Mandarin, oblivious to the groping happening 2 feet away from him. Ethan will be VP by summer, Linda will file for divorce, and everyone gets what they want. Robert gets his freedom, Linda gets a husband who can match her ambitions, and I get a son-in-law who understands business. Mr. Zhang looked deeply uncomfortable now. Mr. Peterson, perhaps we should return to discussing the acquisition terms. But Harold was on a roll. You understand family obligations, Mr. Zhang. Sometimes we must make difficult decisions for the greater good. Robert is a good man, but Linda needs someone stronger, someone who can be a real partner in building our family's legacy. That was the moment I realized I'd heard enough. I'd been the potted plant in the corner for 2 years, quietly absorbing nutrients and providing background decoration while the real players made their moves. But potted plants have one advantage that Harold had forgotten. They're always listening, and they're usually underestimated. Time to stop being the plant and start being the poison. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Everyone looked at me with mild curiosity, probably expecting me to excuse myself for the bathroom or to take a phone call. Instead, I looked directly at Mr. Zhang and spoke in perfectly fluent, accent-free Mandarin. Mr. Zhang, before you consider any business relationship with Peterson Industries, you should know that the financial projections Harold showed you are fabricated. The revenue numbers are inflated by 30%, and the research pipeline he's so proud of is mostly theoretical. Also, the man he wants to make VP is currently playing footsie with my wife under this table, and Harold's been planning their affair for months as part of some twisted succession plan. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Zhang's eyes widened. Harold's face went through several colors before settling on an alarming shade of purple. Linda's mouth fell open in a way that would have been comical under different circumstances. Ethan, who'd finally figured out that something significant had happened even if he couldn't understand what, looked like a deer caught in headlights. Any questions? I continued in Mandarin, then switched to English for the benefit of my wife and her boyfriend. Or should I translate for those who don't speak the language? Harold found his voice first. Robert, what the hell am I doing? I interrupted, still standing. I'm having a conversation with Mr. Zhang about business ethics and family values, 2 concepts that seem to have gotten confused at this table. I reached for my coat, which was hanging on the back of my chair. Mr. Zhang, I'd recommend having your accountants audit any numbers Harold provides. And Harold, you might want to check your expense reports. I'm curious how many of Ethan's hotel bills the company has been covering. Linda finally found her voice. Robert, you're being ridiculous. You don't understand. I understand Mandarin, Linda. I also understand adultery, corporate fraud, and family betrayal. Amazing how multilingual you become when people assume you're stupid. I shrugged into my coat and looked around the table one more time. Harold was sputtering incoherently. Ethan looked like he was trying to solve calculus in his head. Linda had tears in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were from shame or anger. Mr. Zhang stood up and extended his hand to me. Mr. Fox, it was truly a pleasure meeting you. Your Mandarin is excellent. Thank you. I learned from excellent teachers. I shook his hand, then nodded politely to the rest of the table. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. I hear the Peking duck here is outstanding, though I'd recommend avoiding anything that seems too good to be true. I walked out of the Jade Garden with my head high and my marriage officially over. Behind me, I could hear Harold's voice rising in what sounded like damage control mode, but Mr. Zhang's chair had already scraped back from the table. Some deals were ruined before the check arrived. The next morning brought 3 phone calls before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Linda, Harold, and surprisingly, Margaret Peterson, my mother-in-law. I let them all go to voicemail while I sat in my kitchen, planning my next moves with the methodical approach I usually reserved for complex experiments. Linda's message was predictably dramatic. Robert, we need to talk. You completely misunderstood what you heard last night. I can explain everything if you'll just call me back. Please don't do anything rash. Too late for that advice. Harold's voicemail was shorter and angrier. Robert, you need to get your ass to my office this morning. We're going to sort this mess out before it gets out of hand. 9 a.m. sharp. The third message was the most interesting. Margaret Peterson's voice was crisp and controlled. Robert, this is Margaret. I think we should have a conversation about last night's dinner. I'm available at your convenience. Margaret had always been the real power behind Peterson Industries, though she preferred to let Harold play the visible role of CEO. She was sharper than her husband, more strategic, and significantly less prone to the kind of ego-driven mistakes that Harold specialized in. If she was calling me directly, it meant she'd already heard about the dinner disaster and was moving into damage control mode, or she was planning her own moves. I called Sam Morrison first. He answered on the second ring, sounding like he'd been awake for hours, despite it being barely 7 a.m. Rob, how'd the fancy dinner go? You sound like you've got news. I need your professional services, Sam. Full investigation package. I want everything, financial records, phone records, hotel receipts, the works. Jesus, what happened? I gave him the abbreviated version of the previous night's revelations. Sam listened without interrupting, occasionally making those small grunting noises that cops use to indicate they're processing information. So your father-in-law has been pimping out your wife to his golden boy, and they all assumed you were too stupid to notice. That's a crude but accurate summary. And you speak Chinese. Mandarin, yes. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Sam was warming to the subject now. You know what this is, Rob? This is a gift. They've been so busy underestimating you that they've left evidence everywhere. Give me 48 hours and I'll have enough documentation to bury all 3 of them. I want it legal, Sam. No gray areas. Everything I do is legal. Expensive, but legal. What's your budget? I thought about the savings account Linda didn't know about, the one I'd been building from consulting fees and patent royalties. Whatever it takes. After hanging up with Sam, I drove to my lab instead of heading to Harold's office. I needed time to think, and the familiar environment of my research space always helped me process complex problems. Plus, I had no intention of walking into Harold's office unprepared for whatever ambush he was planning. My phone started ringing again, around 9:30. Harold, probably wondering why I hadn't shown up for my scheduled tongue lashing. I let it ring. The second call came from Linda 10 minutes later. Then Ethan tried calling from his office number. I was becoming quite popular. Around 11, my lab assistant knocked on my office door. Dr. Fox, there's a woman here to see you. Says she's your mother-in-law. Margaret Peterson stood in my laboratory's reception area like she owned the place, which, given her family's investment in biogenesis, wasn't entirely inaccurate. She was dressed in her usual understated but expensive style, tailored suit, minimal jewelry, and the kind of confidence that came from having serious money for several generations. Robert, thank you for seeing me. Mrs. Peterson, this is unexpected. I imagine it is. Is there somewhere private we can talk? I led her to my office, a small space dominated by technical journals and molecular models. She looked around with the kind of polite interest wealthy people use when visiting places they'll never need to understand. Harold told me about last night, she said once I'd closed the door. His version, anyway. I'd like to hear yours. So I told her. Everything. The Mandarin conversation, Harold's succession planning, Linda and Ethan's affair, the fabricated financial projections. Margaret listened without interrupting, her expression growing colder with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. How long have you known about Linda and Ethan? Suspected for weeks. Confirmed last night. And Harold's involvement? That was news to me. I thought I was dealing with a cheating wife and an ambitious co-worker. I didn't realize my father-in-law was the puppet master. Margaret stood and walked to my office window, which offered a view of the parking lot and not much else. Harold has always been too clever for his own good, and too stupid to realize when he's being clever. What do you mean? She turned back to me, and I saw something in her expression I'd never noticed before. Steel. I mean that Harold seems to have forgotten that I'm the majority shareholder in Peterson Industries. He's been making plans for my company without consulting me. Your company? 63%, Robert. My father's money built Peterson Industries, and I've been letting Harold play CEO because it kept him happy and out of more serious trouble. But orchestrating affairs and manipulating family relationships crosses a line. I was starting to understand why Margaret had called me instead of simply dealing with Harold directly. What do you need from me? Evidence. Sam Morrison is good at what he does, but I need more than hotel receipts and phone records. I need proof that Harold has been using company resources to facilitate this situation. Expense accounts, company cars, business trips that weren't business. And in exchange? In exchange, Harold loses his CEO position, Ethan gets fired, and Linda discovers that her trust fund has some very specific moral clauses that her grandfather insisted on including. I stared at her. Moral clauses? Adultery voids the trust, Robert, completely. It was my father's idea. He had very traditional views about marriage. Linda gets nothing if she's proven to have committed adultery during her marriage. The implications were staggering. Linda's trust fund was worth several $1,000,000, money she'd always treated as her personal safety net. Without it, she'd be entirely dependent on whatever she could earn at the museum, which wasn't nearly enough to maintain her current lifestyle. You'd do that to your own daughter? Margaret's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. My daughter made her choices, Robert. Now she gets to live with the consequences. The question is whether you're willing to help me document those choices thoroughly enough to make them stick in court. I thought about Linda's condescending comments about my passivity. about Ethan's smug assumption that I was too weak to fight back, about Harold's casual dismissal of me as a man who would land on his feet while they destroyed my marriage for their convenience. What do you need me to do? Over the next hour, Margaret outlined a plan that was both elegant and ruthless. She wanted me to continue playing the role of the oblivious husband while Sam gathered evidence, and she maneuvered Harold into increasingly compromising positions. The goal was to document not just the affair, but Harold's abuse of company resources and his violation of several SEC regulations regarding disclosure of material information to potential business partners. Harold's weakness has always been his ego, Margaret explained. He can't resist showing off, especially when he thinks he's being clever. Give him enough rope and he'll hang himself. And Linda. Linda chose her side, Robert. I'm simply making sure she understands what that choice costs. After Margaret left, I sat in my office for another hour, processing what had just happened. In the space of 24 hours, I'd gone from being a passive victim of other people's schemes to being an active participant in what amounted to a corporate and family coup. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Please come home. We need to talk. I looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Linda wanted to talk, but I was done listening to lies. From now on, I'd be doing the talking, and I had quite a lot to say. Sam Morrison worked fast. By Friday afternoon, he'd already compiled a preliminary dossier that read like a handbook on how not to conduct a discreet affair. Linda and Ethan had been spectacularly careless, leaving a paper trail that a first-year law student could follow. They've been using the company credit card for hotel rooms, Sam explained, spreading photographs across my kitchen table. Look at this. Ethan books the room, Linda shows up 2 hours later, they leave separately. Same pattern, different hotels, going back 4 months. The photographs were damning. Linda entering the Ritz-Carlton in the black dress I'd complimented her on that morning. Ethan leaving the Four Seasons adjusting his tie. The two of them sharing what was clearly an intimate conversation in the lobby of the Mandarin Oriental. How did you get these so quickly? Hotel security cameras are surprisingly accessible when you know which ex-cops work private security. Plus, your mother-in-law opened some doors. Turns out Margaret Peterson has friends in interesting places. That didn't surprise me. Margaret had been working Boston's power networks for 40 years. What else? Sam flipped through several more photos. Text messages. Ethan's phone security is a joke. He uses the same password for everything, and it's his birthday. Linda's more careful, but she's been backing up to the cloud automatically. He handed me a printed transcript of text messages that made my stomach turn. The explicit content was bad enough, but the casual way they discussed me was worse. Robert's working late again. My place, 8 p.m.? Perfect. Does he suspect anything? Are you kidding? He barely notices I exist anymore. This is easier than I thought it would be. Good. Harold says the promotion should come through next month. Then we can stop sneaking around. I can't wait. I'm so tired of pretending to be happy with someone who has no ambition. I set the transcript down carefully. When was this? 2 weeks ago. There's more, but it gets worse from here. Show me. The next batch of messages detailed their plans for my future with the kind of casual cruelty that took my breath away. They'd already discussed how to handle the divorce, what Linda should ask for in the settlement, and how Ethan would help her find a better place to live. The best part, Sam continued, is that they've been documenting Harold's involvement too. Look at this. He showed me a message thread between Linda and her father that laid out the entire scheme. Harold had been actively encouraging the relationship, providing opportunities for Linda and Ethan to spend time together, and planning Ethan's promotion specifically to make him a more attractive partner for his daughter. This is conspiracy, I said. It's something all right. Your mother-in-law is going to love this stuff. I spent the weekend reading through the complete file Sam had assembled. The evidence was overwhelming, but it was also devastating in ways I hadn't expected. Reading the detailed accounts of my wife's affair was like performing surgery on myself without anesthesia. The worst part wasn't the closeness, though the explicit messages were hard enough to stomach. The worst part was how little they thought of me. In their private conversations, I wasn't even a person worth considering. I was an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be solved, a minor inconvenience in their grand plans. Robert's so predictable, Linda had texted Ethan. He'll probably just accept it and move on. He's not the type to make a scene. Not the type to make a scene? We'd see about that. Monday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Margaret Peterson's house in Beacon Hill. She lived in one of those understated mansions that old Boston money preferred. Elegant, expensive, and designed to intimidate without being flashy. Margaret received me in her study, a room lined with first edition books and family portraits going back several generations. She reviewed Sam's evidence with the detached efficiency of someone reading a quarterly report. "This is excellent work," she said finally. "More than sufficient for our purposes." What happens now? Now we move to phase 2. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for Wednesday. Harold thinks it's about the failed Zhang acquisition, but it's actually about his misuse of company resources and his violation of fiduciary duties. Will this be enough to remove him as CEO? Margaret's smile was cold. Robert, this is enough to have him arrested for embezzlement. Using company funds to facilitate his daughter's adultery crosses several legal lines, but I'm not interested in sending him to prison. I'm interested in removing him from my company. She stood and walked to her desk, retrieving a thick legal document. This is Harold's separation agreement. Resignation as CEO, forfeiture of his stock options, and a very modest severance package. In exchange, I don't press criminal charges. And Linda? Linda's trust fund is already frozen. My lawyers filed the paperwork this morning, citing the moral clauses. She'll have 30 days to contest it, but given the evidence we have, that would be inadvisable. I stared at the separation agreement. Harold's signature line was blank, but everything else was filled in. Margaret had been planning this move for longer than I'd realized. How long have you known? About the affair, I suspected for weeks. About Harold's involvement? That was news to me, and it was the final straw. I've tolerated his ego and his poor judgment for 25 years, but manipulating family relationships for business purposes is unacceptable. She returned to her chair and fixed me with that sharp gaze. The question now is what you want to do about your marriage. It was a fair question. The evidence Sam had gathered would make divorce proceedings straightforward, but it would also make them public. Linda's reputation would be destroyed, along with Ethan's career prospects. I want them to understand what they've lost, I said finally, and I want them to understand that I'm not as passive as they assumed. Margaret nodded approvingly. Then you'll appreciate what I have planned for Wednesday. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in Peterson Industries' executive conference room. Margaret had invited me to attend as a technical consultant, which gave me a front row seat for Harold's destruction. Harold walked into the conference room looking confident, probably expecting to discuss damage control strategies for the Zhang deal. Instead, he found the company's 5 board members, Margaret, me, and a man I didn't recognize wearing an expensive suit and carrying a briefcase. "What's all this?" Harold asked, taking his usual seat at the head of the table. "This is a formal review of your performance as CEO," Margaret said calmly. Mr. Williams here is our attorney. Robert is here as a witness." Harold's confidence wavered slightly. "Margaret, if this is about the Zhang situation, I can explain. This isn't about Mr. Zhang, though your behavior at that dinner was certainly unprofessional. This is about your systematic abuse of company resources and your violation of your fiduciary duties as CEO." Margaret nodded to the attorney, who opened his briefcase and began distributing copies of Sam's evidence. Hotel receipts, credit card statements, text message transcripts, photographs, everything laid out in chronological order like a prosecution case. Harold's face went through several color changes as he realized what he was looking at. "Where did you get this?" "That's not the relevant question, Harold. The relevant question is whether you can explain why company funds were used to pay for hotel rooms where your daughter conducted an extramarital affair." The other board members were flipping through the evidence with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. These were serious business people, and Harold's actions reflected poorly on the entire company. "Margaret, you're taking this out of context." "Am I? Because it seems quite clear to me. You've been using Peterson Industries' resources to facilitate adultery. You've been making personnel decisions based on personal relationships rather than business merit, and you've been lying to potential business partners about material facts." She gestured toward me. "Robert was kind enough to provide us with a translation of your conversation with Mr. Zhang. Would you like me to read it aloud?" Harold looked like he was about to be sick. "This is a family matter, Margaret. It doesn't belong in a boardroom. You made it a business matter when you started using company money to fund it." Margaret's voice was ice cold now. "You made it a boardroom matter when you planned to promote your daughter's lover based on personal considerations rather than professional qualifications." One of the board members, an elderly man named Richardson, cleared his throat. "Harold, these allegations are very serious. Do you have any response?" Harold looked around the table, probably searching for allies, but found only hostile faces. I was trying to do what was best for the family, and for the company." "By encouraging adultery and embezzlement?" Margaret asked. "By lying to business partners? By violating SEC disclosure requirements?" The attorney leaned forward. "Mr. Peterson, I should inform you that these actions constitute grounds for both civil and criminal prosecution. However, Mrs. Peterson has authorized me to offer you an alternative." He slid the separation agreement across the table. Harold's hands shook slightly as he read it. "You want me to resign?" "I want you to resign, forfeit your unvested stock options, and accept a modest severance package," Margaret corrected. "In exchange, we handle this matter internally." "And if I refuse?" "Then we turn this evidence over to the district attorney's office and let them decide how to proceed. Embezzlement charges, securities fraud, conspiracy. I'm sure they'll find something that interests them." Harold stared at the agreement for a long moment. Around the table, the other board members waited in silence. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a sentencing hearing. "I need time to consider this." "You have until 5 p.m. today," Margaret said. "After that, the offer expires and we proceed with criminal referrals." Harold stood up slowly, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Margaret, I've given 25 years to this company. And I've given you 25 years to learn how to behave professionally. Apparently that wasn't enough time." As Harold left the conference room, Margaret turned to me. "Phase 2 complete. Are you ready for Phase 3? I thought about Linda's text messages, about her casual cruelty, about her assumption that I would simply accept whatever scraps they threw me. "What did you have in mind?" Margaret's smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. "I thought we might attend the museum's fundraising gala this weekend, as my guests, of course. The gala where Linda would be expecting to celebrate her new relationship publicly, now that she assumed her divorce would be proceeding smoothly." "I'd be honored," I said. Some parties were about to get much more interesting than the hosts anticipated. Harold signed the separation agreement at 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before Margaret's timeline. Sam called me with the news while I was packing Linda's belongings into boxes, a therapeutic exercise I'd been putting off for too long. "Your father-in-law just became your ex-father-in-law," Sam said. Margaret's assistant confirmed he cleaned out his office and left the building. Security escorted him out. "What about Ethan?" "Terminated for cause, effective immediately. Apparently he tried to argue that his relationship with Linda was personal and shouldn't affect his employment. That didn't go over well with the new interim CEO." "Who's the interim CEO?" "Margaret herself. Seems she's done letting other people run her company." I continued folding Linda's clothes while Sam filled me in on the afternoon's drama. Ethan had apparently made a scene in the lobby, loudly proclaiming his innocence and threatening legal action. Security had been called twice. "The best part," Sam continued, "is that Linda showed up around 3 o'clock, probably expecting to celebrate Ethan's promotion. Instead, she found him carrying a cardboard box to his car." I could picture the scene. Linda in one of her power outfits, ready to play the role of the executive's girlfriend, walking into chaos instead of triumph. "Where is she now?" "No idea, but she's been calling your office every 20 minutes. Your lab assistant says she sounds increasingly desperate." Linda's desperation was confirmed when she showed up at our house, my house now, at 7 p.m. I heard her key in the lock, followed by her footsteps on the hardwood floor. "Robert, we need to talk." I continued packing her books, not bothering to respond. She found me in the living room, surrounded by boxes of her belongings. "What are you doing?" "Packing your things. I thought that was obvious." Linda looked around at the boxes with growing alarm. "Robert, stop this. We can work through this. What happened at the restaurant was a misunderstanding." "Which part was the misunderstanding? The part where you've been sleeping with Ethan for 4 months, or the part where your father orchestrated the whole thing?" "You don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly. You wanted a husband with more ambition, your father wanted a more compliant son-in-law, and Ethan wanted a promotion. Everyone got what they wanted except me." I stood up and handed her a legal document. "Divorce papers. I'm citing adultery, which is still grounds in Massachusetts. My lawyer says it should be straightforward given the evidence." Linda's face went pale as she scanned the document. "Robert, you're being hasty. We can go to counseling. We can work this out." "Like you worked out your relationship with Ethan?" "That's over. Ethan and I, it was a mistake, a moment of weakness." I almost laughed. "Linda, I have 4 months of hotel receipts, text messages, photographs. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a systematic deception." She sat down heavily on the couch, the legal papers scattered around her. "What about my trust fund?" "Frozen. Your mother filed the paperwork yesterday. Apparently your grandfather had strong feelings about adultery." The color drained from Linda's face completely. "She can't do that. That money is mine." "Read the trust documents. Adultery voids the entire fund. Your grandfather was very specific about that." Linda stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You planned this. You and my mother planned this together." "Your mother planned it. I just provided the evidence." "You bastard." Linda's voice was rising now, panic replacing shock. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so much better than everyone else, but you're nothing. You're a nobody who got lucky when I married you. And now you get to find out what life is like without that luck. Linda stood up, her hands shaking with rage. You won't get away with this. I'll fight the divorce. I'll fight the trust fund. I'll make your life hell. With what money? Your job at the museum pays $40,000 a year, and that's assuming they keep you after the scandal breaks. Ethan's unemployed, and your father just lost his company. Who exactly is going to fund this legal battle? The question hung in the air like smoke. Linda had never had to think about money before. The trust fund had always been her safety net. Without it, she was facing a very different future than the one she'd planned. I hate you, she said finally. I know. The feeling is mutual. Linda gathered up the divorce papers and headed for the door, then turned back. This isn't over, Robert. Yes, it is. You just haven't accepted it yet. After she left, I poured myself a scotch and called Sam to update him on the conversation. He listened with the professional detachment of someone who'd seen too many marriages implode. She'll probably try to cause problems, Sam warned. Angry spouses do stupid things. What kind of problems? Harassment, property damage, false accusations. I've seen it all. You might want to consider a restraining order. Let's see what happens first. Linda's angry, but she's not stupid. I was wrong about that. The next morning, I woke up to find my car keyed and my mailbox knocked over. Linda's handiwork, presumably, though I couldn't prove it. I took photos and filed a police report, more for documentation than because I expected any action. The harassment escalated over the next few days, hang-up calls at all hours, pizza deliveries I hadn't ordered, a subscription to a dozen magazines charged to my credit card, petty stuff, but persistent. The breaking point came Thursday evening when I got home from work to find Ethan waiting in my driveway. He was leaning against his Audi, the same car he'd probably been driving to his hotel meetings with Linda, wearing an expensive suit and an expression that suggested he thought intimidation was still an option. We need to talk, he said as I got out of my car. No, we don't. You've destroyed my career over a personal matter. That's not fair. I almost admired his audacity. You destroyed your career when you decided to sleep with your boss's daughter. I just provided the documentation. Linda and I are in love. You wouldn't understand that. You've never been passionate about anything in your life. I'm passionate about not being made a fool of by my wife and her boyfriend. Ethan stepped closer, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate me. You think you're so smart, don't you? But you're still the same pathetic loser Linda settled for. She was never happy with you. And now she's not my problem anymore. This isn't over. I'm going to fight this. I'm going to get my job back, and Linda's going to get her money back, and you're going to end up with nothing. I looked at him for a long moment. This handsome, ambitious young man who'd thought he could take whatever he wanted without consequences. Ethan, let me explain something to you. I spent 3 years in Shanghai learning how business really works. The first lesson is that when you make a play for power, you better make sure you win, because losing has consequences. Is that a threat? It's an observation. You made a play for my wife, my father-in-law's company, and my position in the family. You lost. Now you get to live with the consequences. Ethan's face flushed red. You think you're untouchable because you've got Margaret Peterson on your side? That won't last forever. It doesn't have to last forever. It just has to last longer than your ability to cause problems. I started walking toward my front door, but Ethan grabbed my arm. I'm not done talking to you. That was his mistake. I turned around and looked at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. Take your hand off me. Or what? Or I'll break your wrist. Something in my voice must have convinced him I wasn't bluffing, because he let go immediately. But he wasn't done being stupid. You can't intimidate me, Robert. I know what kind of man you are. You're weak. I smiled. You know what kind of man you thought I was. Turns out you were wrong about that, just like you were wrong about everything else. I went inside and locked the door, leaving Ethan standing in my driveway. Through the window, I watched him get back in his Audi and sit there for several minutes, probably trying to process the fact that his intimidation attempt had failed. When he finally drove away, I called Sam. Ethan just paid me a visit, tried the tough guy routine. How'd that work out for him? About as well as you'd expect, but I think Linda and Ethan are planning something bigger. This feels like reconnaissance. What kind of something bigger? I don't know yet, but they're not going to accept losing gracefully. Sam was quiet for a moment. You know, Rob, there's something to be said for being proactive instead of reactive. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time to stop waiting for them to make the next move. Maybe it's time to make a move of your own. I thought about Linda's casual cruelty in her text messages, about Ethan's assumption that he could intimidate me, about Harold's dismissive comments about my passivity. What did you have in mind? Well, there's this museum gala this weekend. Public event, lots of important people, perfect venue for making a statement. Margaret had already invited me to the gala as her guest. Linda would be there, probably with Ethan, expecting to make their relationship public now that they assumed the divorce would be proceeding quietly. What kind of statement? Sam's laugh was dark. The kind that makes sure everyone in Boston knows exactly what kind of people they're dealing with. Some statements were worth making in public. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts fundraising gala was the kind of event where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen while pretending to care about culture. Black tie, champagne, and enough old money to buy a small country. Linda had been planning this event for months, and it was supposed to be her moment of triumph, the night she introduced Ethan as her new partner to Boston society. Instead, it was going to be her public execution. I arrived with Margaret Peterson at 7 p.m. sharp, both of us dressed impeccably for what Margaret had started calling the final act. She wore a stunning black gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, while I'd invested in a new tuxedo that Sam assured me would photograph well. Remember, Margaret said as we walked up the museum's marble steps, timing is everything. Let them get comfortable first. The main hall was decorated with flowers that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and the guest list read like a who's who of Boston power brokers. I spotted several Peterson Industries board members, half a dozen city councilors, and enough old money to fund a revolution. Linda was holding court near the Egyptian wing, looking radiant in a red dress that I'd never seen before. Ethan stood beside her, playing the role of devoted boyfriend with the kind of practiced charm that had probably gotten him this far in life. They looked happy, confident, and completely unaware that their world was about to implode. "There's our target," Margaret murmured. "Shall we mingle first?" We spent the first hour working the room, with Margaret introducing me to people I'd only read about in the business section. The conversation was polite but pointed. Everyone wanted to know about Harold's sudden departure from Peterson Industries, and Margaret's answers were masterfully vague. "Family considerations," she'd say with a slight smile. Harold decided it was time to explore other opportunities. I noticed several people glancing toward Linda and Ethan, probably wondering if there was a connection between Harold's departure and his daughter's new relationship. Boston society loved gossip, and the pieces of this particular puzzle were starting to come together in people's minds. Around 8:30, Linda spotted us across the room. I saw her face change as she realized I was there, and she said something urgent to Ethan, who immediately started scanning the crowd for threats. "They've seen us," I told Margaret. "Perfect. Now we wait for them to make the first move." We didn't have to wait long. Linda approached us during the cocktail hour, Ethan trailing slightly behind like a nervous bodyguard. "Mother?" Linda said, her voice carefully controlled. "Robert, I didn't expect to see you here." "It's a public event, Linda," Margaret replied coolly, "and Robert is my guest." Linda's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "How nice. Robert, I hope you're not planning to cause any unpleasantness. This is an important night for the museum." "I wouldn't dream of it," I said. "I'm just here to support the arts." Ethan stepped forward, probably feeling the need to assert himself. "Robert, I hope there are no hard feelings about our conversation the other day. I may have been a bit direct." "Not at all. I appreciate directness. It's so much better than deception." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Linda's eyes narrowed, and I could see her calculating whether to escalate or retreat. "Well," she said finally, "I hope you both enjoy the evening. Ethan and I have some important people to see." As they walked away, Margaret chuckled softly. "She's nervous. Good." The real entertainment began during dinner. The museum had set up tables throughout the main hall, with the head table positioned prominently near the information desk. Linda and Ethan were seated with the museum's board of directors, while Margaret and I were placed with the major donors, a distinction that wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. I'd asked Sam to position himself near the main entrance with a photographer he'd hired for the evening. They were posing as society reporters, which gave them access to the event and a legitimate reason to be taking pictures. During the salad course, I excused myself and walked to the men's room, passing close enough to Linda's table to overhear her conversation with the museum director. "The Peterson Industries partnership is still very much on track," she was saying. "The recent leadership changes actually strengthen our position." Leadership changes. That was one way to describe her father's forced resignation. "And your personal situation?" the director asked delicately. "The rumors about your marriage?" "Robert and I have decided to pursue different paths." Linda said smoothly. "It's all very amicable. In fact, I'd like you to meet Ethan Lowe. He'll be taking a much more active role in our cultural initiatives." Ethan beamed and shook hands with the director, probably imagining himself as a patron of the arts. It was almost sad how completely he misunderstood his situation. I returned to my table and nodded to Margaret. Phase 1 complete. Excellent. Are you ready for Phase 2? Phase 2 began during the auction portion of the evening. The museum was selling donated items to raise funds, and Linda was serving as one of the auctioneers, a role that put her on stage in front of the entire gathering. She was good at it, I had to admit. Charming, witty, and skilled at extracting maximum donations from wealthy bidders. She just successfully auctioned a weekend in the Hamptons for $30,000 when Margaret stood up. "Excuse me," Margaret called out, her voice carrying clearly across the hall. "Before we continue, I'd like to make an announcement." Linda looked confused, but maintained her professional smile. "Of course, Mrs. Peterson, the floor is yours." Margaret walked to the front of the room with the confidence of someone who owned half the people in attendance. "Thank you. I wanted to take this opportunity to address some recent changes at Peterson Industries, since many of our business partners are here tonight." The room fell silent. This wasn't part of the planned program, and everyone sensed that something significant was about to happen. As many of you know, my husband Harold recently resigned as CEO of Peterson Industries. What you may not know is that his resignation was necessitated by his systematic abuse of company resources and his violation of fiduciary duties. A murmur ran through the crowd. Linda's face had gone pale, and Ethan looked like he was trying to solve advanced calculus in his head. Margaret continued, her voice clear and authoritative. "Specifically, Harold used company funds to facilitate an extramarital affair between our daughter Linda and a company employee. This affair was conducted using corporate credit cards, company cars, and business facilities." The murmur became a buzz. Several people turned to stare at Linda, who was standing frozen on the stage. "Furthermore," Margaret continued, "Harold planned to promote his daughter's lover based on personal considerations rather than professional qualifications, which constitutes a clear violation of his duties to our shareholders." Linda found her voice. "Mother, this is neither the time nor the place." "On the contrary, Linda, this is exactly the time and place. These people deserve to know what kind of person they're considering as a partner." Margaret gestured toward me. "My son-in-law Robert discovered this situation and brought it to my attention. Rather than handle it quietly, I decided that transparency was the better approach." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "I have documentation of everything I've described, hotel receipts, text messages, photographs, financial records, all obtained legally and all conclusively proving the systematic deception I've described." The room was silent now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. Margaret handed the envelope to the museum director. "I think the museum's board should review this material before making any decisions about partnerships with individuals who have demonstrated such poor judgment." Linda stepped down from the stage, her face flushed with humiliation and rage. "You vindictive snake! How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Hold people accountable for their actions? Protect my company from further embarrassment?" Ethan finally found his voice. "This is a private family matter. You have no right to air it in public." Margaret turned to him with a look that could have frozen fire. "You made it a public matter when you used my company's resources to conduct your affair. You made it a business matter when you accepted promotions based on favors rather than professional merit." The crowd was riveted now. This was better than any soap opera, and it was happening right in front of them. Linda was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "Robert, please, stop this." I stood up and walked to the front of the room. The crowd parted like I was radioactive, which I probably was at this point. "Linda, you had 4 months to stop this. Every hotel room, every lie, every text message about how stupid and passive I was, you could have stopped at any time." I turned to address the room. My wife and her boyfriend assumed I was too weak to fight back. They assumed I'd quietly accept whatever scraps they threw me. They assumed I didn't understand what was happening right in front of me. I pulled out my phone and activated the speaker. "I'd like to play a recording from last week's dinner at the Jade Garden. My father-in-law was explaining the situation to a potential business partner in Mandarin, assuming I couldn't understand what he was saying. The recording played clearly through the room's sound system. Harold's voice speaking in broken Mandarin about Linda's affair, Ethan's planned promotion, and his assumption that I would be fine with being replaced. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. "The gentleman Harold was speaking to decided not to do business with Peterson Industries," I continued. "Apparently he has strong feelings about business ethics and family values." Linda was sobbing openly now, and Ethan looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Several people were taking pictures with their phones, and I could see Sam near the entrance, documenting everything. I want everyone here to understand something, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the hall. I'm not the passive victim they thought I was. I'm not the weak man who would quietly accept betrayal. And I'm certainly not going to let them rewrite history to make themselves look better. I turned back to Linda. You wanted a husband with more ambition? Congratulations. You just saw what ambition looks like when it's focused. The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. Linda fled toward the exit, Ethan close behind her. Several people tried to stop them for questions, but they pushed through the crowd and disappeared into the night. Margaret returned to the microphone. I apologize for the disruption, but I felt transparency was important. The auction will continue momentarily. As the crowd slowly returned to their seats, Sam appeared at my elbow. That was beautiful, Rob. Absolutely beautiful. Did you get everything? Every second. The photographer got some great shots, too. This is going to be all over social media by midnight. I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me. Some shocked, some impressed, some clearly calculating how this information might be useful to them. Think they'll recover from this? Sam's laugh was dark. Rob, you just destroyed them in front of half of Boston's power structure. Their reputations are finished. Linda will be lucky to get a job at a small-town museum, and Ethan's career in this city is over. Margaret appeared beside us, looking satisfied. Well done, Robert. Very well done. What happens now? Now? Now they disappear. People like Linda and Ethan can't survive without social connections and family money. They have neither anymore. I thought about Linda's text messages, about her casual cruelty, about her assumption that I would simply accept whatever fate they chose for me. Good, I said. As we left the museum, Sam clapped me on the shoulder. So what's next for you, Rob? I looked back at the building where my marriage had officially ended, where my wife's reputation had been destroyed, where her boyfriend's career had been terminated. Next, I think I'll focus on my research. Turns out I have a talent for long-term strategic planning. Margaret laughed. Robert, if you ever want a career in business, let me know. I could use someone with your particular skills. As we walked down the museum steps, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of deception, of being underestimated, of being treated like a fool, all of it was gone. Behind us, the gala continued, but the real entertainment was over. Linda and Ethan were finished in Boston, Harold was out of his company, and I was free to build whatever life I chose. Sometimes the best revenge was simply letting people face the consequences of their own actions, in public, with witnesses, and perfect documentation.